Well, good morning and welcome to another edition of the Newsmaker on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. My name is Abiodun Adilore, and on this morning's edition, our focus will be on shaping Lagos, a reflection on governance and future prospects. And my guest is Mr. Funsho Doherty, who was the 2023 governorship candidate in Lagos in the last elections 2023. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's nice to have you on the program.
Thank you.
Yes. Let's start like this. So what inspired your initial decision to enter politics, and how has your perspective evolved since your first run for Lagos State Governor?
I think that, and I've told this story many times, my career has largely been in the private sector. Even though I have been engaged in governance issues, I would say for the past maybe 12 years. So my first article on governance was published maybe 12 years ago. So I've always had that interest. But it's clear to me that the biggest challenge that we face nationally, and specifically within Lagos State, is a failure of leadership and a lack of governance in the public interest. And so, to cut a long story short, ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, the only way you get to good governance is if people who can make a difference step up, and if the people, that is the electorate, support them into office, and that means that people like us, if we think we can make a positive difference, need to step forward, and that's essentially what drove my decision. Now, with respect to the second part of your question, which is, how has that perspective changed? And I would say it has not, to be honest. The first time I went out was in the 2023 race. And as you know, Rome is not built in a day. I think we laid a good foundation. This is not a battle that is won in one day. And as you know, we're not trying to claim territory that is vacant, right? So people will always fight back. But I think we've laid a strong foundation, and we remain in the battle, and I think we will prevail.
All right, you ran under the platform of the African Democratic Congress, ADC, but now you have moved to the PDP. What factors led to that decision?
Okay, well, again, when you think about how you build a path to political office, it's important to lay a foundation, and I think the ADC platform allowed us to lay that foundation. But you have to think about, what's the next way to build on that foundation in a way that is purposeful and that has a good chance of success. And I think that this decision to join the PDP is in furtherance of that thought process. I think the ADC experience gave us an opportunity to be in the public eye, for the public to have a view of us and me personally, to know the kind of person I am, to know what I stand for, and so on and so forth. And that is what has created the foundation that can now be built upon within the PDP. And I think that, the experience so far in the PDP has been a positive one. I think there's a good symbiosis there. I think the party is happy to have me, and I'm happy to be in the party. And I think that it will be a good partnership and can only benefit the people of Lagos going forward.
So how do you plan to navigate the internal dynamics and challenges within the PDP to achieve your goals for Lagos State?
Well, I think that, in politics, every party is, it's politics. So every party is a political organization. So you have to navigate a political organization. But I will tell you that, even large corporations are political organizations. So it's par for the course, right? The process of building networks and engagement within the party is ongoing. Like I said, it's a positive exercise so far, in the sense that the party itself is looking to reposition itself, is looking to unify itself, is looking to take the position that it's truly its own, which is that of the only real significant opposition on a national scale to the APC. And so that's going well. It's a process that requires quite a lot of engagement. It's a process that requires humility. It's a process that requires the ability to or the willingness to learn. At the same time, a willingness to contribute to the direction in which the party is going. And I think that so far it's going very well. And I think that I'm very confident that we'll have a good outcome.
All right, you have criticized Lagos state governance as exclusionary and extractive. What specific policy reforms would you prioritize if elected?
You see, if you look at Lagos, we can talk from now till the cows come home. But the truth of the matter is that after being governed by one ruling entity for 30 years, almost 30 years, right? Yes. So 99 to 2025 now, we're about to enter. In the middle of the next term, we'll hit 30 years. 30 years is a generation. So no matter what we want to say, if we look at Lagos, there are some basic things, right, that the people lack, right? So if we ask people that, what is your standard of living today compared to what it was 30 years ago? Are you better off? Are you worse off? Are you substantially, do you have substantially better economics? Or are you poorer than you were 30 years ago? Right. Basic things like water, housing, power, quality of transportation, quality of education that people get coming out of school, quality of healthcare, the living standards of the average citizen. These are the things by which you measure the effectiveness of government. It's not about whether a road was built here or a road was not built there. At the end of the day, the outcome of governance, the trillions of naira that we spend each year, how has it improved the life of the average citizen? Lagos is a very endowed state. We're far more endowed than most other states. We earn a lot more. People come here to establish businesses of their own volition. Government doesn't need to spend too much time trying to convince people to come to Lagos. Lagos has been a commercial center for centuries. So really, a government in Lagos, the question you ask is not so much, what have you done to create things? It's really, what have you done with what you've been entrusted with? And I think on that count, there is so much more that can be done. And I think at the heart of it, really, is essentially attacking corruption and waste in government and ensuring that government's resources are used in the public interest and not in the private interest. And if that had been done for 30 years, the quality of life of the average Lagosian today will be far, far better than it is today.
So how do you propose addressing issues like public and water supply, affordable power, quality education, and climate risks such as flooding? Because it looks like flooding is something that is very common, especially on the Lagos Island. Recently, there was the issue of Jankara area where there's flooding and looks like nothing is being done about it.
So, you've touched about it on a number of things. First of all, in the area of water, you have to make it a priority. If you don't make it a priority, it's not going to happen. And it's not a priority for this government from what we can see. Even if you look at the budgets and you look at what is spent on the provision of water infrastructure, it's pittance. So it is clear that is not a priority. And if you make it a priority, you will make it happen, making water available across the state. Because that's a basic building block, right? People need access to water. And it impacts so many other things like health, right? And quality of life. Without water, you have greater incidence of diseases, right? So that's one. On the question of the environment and flooding, again, you have to prioritize
these things. And you have to vote on the side of the people rather than on the side of commercial interests. That's one of the big challenges, I think, of the ruling administration that we've had, is that they have tended to vote on the side of commercial interests over the interests of the public. So when you see unbridled development, commercial developments, real estate developments in areas that are wetland areas, these are the natural drainage mechanisms for coastal cities like Lagos, right? All the drainage that we build using concrete and all of that is only meant to supplement the natural wetlands that are the draining mechanisms provided by nature. So reclamation of land, building in wetland areas, all of these things are things that government must control, because the long-term effect of them is produced in things like flooding, which disproportionately affects the poor amongst us. One of the things that is an example of this, for example, is the recent decision to build the Lagos-Calabar coastal road. Now, that road may be beneficial for economic purposes. That may well be the case. So one does not have fundamental objections to building a road. But the way you go about it is also very important. So let's just looking at just the environmental, and there are other concerns we can raise about it, such as the procurement concerns. But if you just look at the environmental part of it, if you are building 100 kilometers of road in coastal wetland areas in a city like Lagos, which, as you have yourself noted, is an area that is prone to flooding, it is incumbent upon you to do a very detailed environmental impact assessment, which you must publish, by the way, which there's a law that says you must do that, so that it is clear that those issues have been well considered and well dealt with. And if you don't have anything to hide, you will publish it as the law requires, so that we know that these things have been thought through, right? But if we don't, then we end up dealing with the problem in a downstream sort of way, where we're trying to build all sorts of drainage mechanisms and so on, which are tremendous cost, which may or may not be effective. And we have these perennial issues of flooding. So these things are all interrelated, and we should deal with them in a proactive way, not in a reactive way.
Yeah, I was just about asking about the Lagos-Calabar highway, because I know, you recently there was a case that was instituted about it. What are your thoughts concerning that project?
Well, you see, at the end of the day, a government sets its priorities. Of course, you can ask the question whether, in the context of the Nigeria of today, given our massive budget deficits and the issues that we are grappling with, whether a 15 trillion new road, is a priority issue for us. That's a discussion you can have. But, there's an elected government, there's a cabinet, so they are elected to make that decision, and they've made that decision. But if you do decide to do such a thing, you must do it in a way that is lawful, and in a way that ensures that the public interest is not overwhelmed by commercial interests and commercial interests that are actually linked to some of the people who are in government. And so it is common sense that if you are doing a large project, you subject it to competitive bidding to see that you get the most value for your money. This is not an optional thing. There is a law, the Public Procurement Act, that requires it. And so choosing to go ahead, as the government has done, without going through that process, in our judgment, is unlawful. And we have instituted an action in court to challenge it. And we have that the first mention has come, and the hearing will happen in January, substantively. And the court will make that judgment. We think at a time, and this is important, at a time when you are asking people to make unprecedented economic sacrifices, you remove fuel subsidy, you free the naira at the same time, and so costs go through the roof and people's costs of living skyrocket, all of which is caused by, if you really dig down, all of which at the root of it is profligate spending by government, inefficient spending by government in the past that gets us to this position. Now, you cannot, at a time when that is going on, now be issuing trillion naira contracts in a way that is, in our view, unlawful, and that almost guarantees that you will not get value for money to entities that it is widely known are affiliated to members within the present government. So, to me, it is very clear, it's very unconscionable. We will not sit back and allow that situation to stand. We believe it's an affront to the people. And somebody must stand up, and we're standing up, and we're going to court about it. And at the end of the day, this is not about whether to do the road or not do the road. That is an executive decision. But to do the road, you must do it in a lawful way that ensures that the public interest, the public purse is protected at a time when everybody is making unprecedented sacrifices at the instance of the present government. So these are the issues on the procurement side. I've spoken about on the environmental side, which is also important. So for these primarily two reasons, these are the two sort of pillars on which the legal action that we have instituted stand.
All right, looking at the present economic situation with the policies that the federal government has made, and the impact it's having on the people. A lot of people have said there's been a lot of policy somersault. What can be done better to make the situation favorable for the people?
So there are a couple of things. Maybe there are many things, but I will highlight a few. So first is that, you see, the way to good governance is that the people who are in positions of leadership have to act in the public interest and not in self or personal or conflicted interest. That's one of the biggest problems that we face. If you don't deal with that, with the situation in which we've been since independence, if you give us another 50 years, we will still be in that situation if we don't deal with that thing. Because you will make progress for 2 or 3 years, you will lose that progress over the next 3 to 5 years. So we must deal with corruption. We must deal with this lack of transparency, this impunity in government, and we must deal with it decisively. People have to be prosecuted. You have to have a zero tolerance for it. You cannot not do it and expect to make progress. We can talk from now till whenever, but if you don't do it, we will not make progress. Right? So that's the first. Then when you know that the people, when the people who are in the seats are there acting for the people, the question is now, the question then becomes, are they doing the right things? That's when the question of competence comes in, the right policies versus wrong policies, etc. And we can have debates around, subsidy, around exchange rate, and so on. And that's the topical debate. It is granted the reason why we are in the situation in which we are with respect to fuel subsidy and exchange rate is because of the actions of many governments, not just this government. But this government, by its approach, compounded some of those issues. It's like if somebody is sick and you go to a doctor and the doctor says, take this medicine, and you take it 3 times a day after food, right? If that medicine is supposed to have been taken before food, right? That doctor has done a bad job because it may have the opposite effect of what it's supposed to do. So even though you might argue that, well, yes, the man needed the drug, well, maybe, but how did you administer the drug? Did you administer it in a way that would help the man or in the way that would hurt the man? And I think that's the issue around this whole notion of both the exchange rate and the fuel subsidies. The way it was handled, I think, was incompetent and compounded the issue. Even though ultimately that's the direction in which we need to move, right? So these are some of the things. And then I would say, finally, if you have a desire to do the right thing, you surround yourself with the right people.
Yes.
You will ensure that the cabinet you have is a cabinet of capacity and also a cabinet of character. And that, you are making collectively decisions that are in the public interest. Not a cabinet that is weak, that is beholden to you, that is essentially going to endorse anything that you bring. And the same is true of actually the legislature, which should also act as a repository of capacity, right, and public interest that serves as a counterweight to the executive, ensuring that collectively as a government, the people have a government in power made up of the different arms that is robust and, by virtue of the checks and balances that exist within the system, will ultimately produce outcomes that are in their interest. It is clear that we don't have that today.
Governments seem to be claiming that with the removal of subsidy, they're making so much. And the big question people keep asking is, if you're making so much, why do we keep borrowing money?
Well, part of that is a technical question. So, on one hand, you can say we've removed subsidy and so we're making so much more money. It's true. When you measure it in naira terms, that you say, okay, the money that we make from making oil, when we translate it into naira, because the rate is higher, we have more naira, right? That's basic mathematics. But the naira that you have, what can you do with it? Is it more than what you could do with it with the naira before, right? Because if devaluation has taken away the impact of that additional value, then you're back where you started. So it's a circular argument. So if you're funding the same service, just like human beings, just like us, right? If you're in your house, you're in a salary, you got a salary increment, but inflation wipes it away. You are back where you started, maybe worse off. Most people in Nigeria are worse off, by the way, than where they started off, because many did not get salary increments. Even those that got salary increments, it's probably a pittance of what inflation actually was. So you have to ask yourself, that whole process, could it have been better managed such that the outcome that was produced is one that was not so heavily weighted against the common man, the man with the least ability? Because that's essentially what happened. They are bearing the brunt of this. The people who are on fixed incomes, the people who are earning salaries, these are the people who are the civil servants who are at the bottom of the rung, right? Who don't have access to maybe means of making, dramatic extra monies. They are the most affected, right? And so is there a way that it could have been better managed, right? Such as, for example, not freeing the two at the same time without a concrete plan in place to manage the exchange rate part of it. You see, because part of what has happened is that you freed the two at the same time. You did not manage the exchange rate aspect of it well. So there was a free for all where the currency, right, the bottom fell out of the currency. And because you freed the subsidy, the effect ultimately is like fourfold, because you've removed the subsidy, then the rate that makes up the price also went through the roof. So it's almost like exponential. It's like times 2 or times 4, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So and other things also, which we can get to, they're a bit technical. But for example, as part of the process of managing that, you have to ask the question, that what was the role of the banks? How did government interface with the banks? In interfacing with the banks, did they stand on the side of the public interest, or did they stand on the side of the commercial interest of banks? Right? Because as part of that whole process, it was revealed that the banks had billions and billions of dollars that they had accumulated. Several $1 billion that they've accumulated in contravention of the normal rules of banking, where they're not supposed to, as operators in the foreign exchange space, be accumulating these dollars. And they did. Now, the process of government unwinding it, did it unwind it in a way that would support the public interest, use it as a means of managing the currency? They didn't. And that's partly why we're in the situation in which we are. So I would say generally, and this is true nationally, but I think it's even especially true in Lagos. Very often, government acts on the side of the elite over the less privileged, on the side of the rich over the poor, on the side of the connected over the common man. And that is why I have said that the model that's been applied in Lagos over the last 30 years is extractive rather than inclusive.
All right, let's come back to Lagos now. How can Lagos state effectively address the housing deficit and improve living conditions in areas like Makoko, where residents live in extreme poverty?
Okay, so there are two questions wrapped up in that. There's housing and then there's poverty. So let me take housing first and then I'll come back and take poverty. I think that this state, again, has taken the wrong approach with respect to housing. One of the things that I advocate, and should I be given the opportunity to to run Lagos, what I would focus on is massive expansion of mass housing. And when I say mass, I'm not talking about the 20 houses they do here, 20 houses, one homes. They have this homes
the
thing
homes
that
project.
they do. That's not the kind. We're talking about mass housing, right? And I would link it to the transportation strategy for the state, such that what we're doing in rail is integrated with what we are doing in mass housing, so that you open up new axes where you can build large volumes of units, and then there are transportation links, right, that link them to wherever they need to be linked within the metropolis, right? And that's the way cities expand over time and grow to meet the growing needs of the metropolis. And we have not seen that. What we've seen is a very sort of haphazard, little approaches. That's not what Lagos needs, right? And this is not about money, by the way, right? Because these are things that private sector can come in and help fund. So one of the things that I would suggest that we explore, for example, is the way in which we can use the private sector to make that happen. And we have, a couple of strategies there that essentially will create a situation where the private sector can support this activity on a large scale, right? And that will transform, right, the housing landscape within Lagos, which is what you need. You don't need incremental things as far as housing is concerned in Lagos. Now, with respect to the Makoko issue and poverty, so those communities, obviously, this is not the ideal kind of situation that anybody wants, including the people who live there. So we have to think about how do we fix that problem in a way that is humane, and think about how to resettle those people and ensure that those slum communities, which is what they are. Nobody wants to live in a slum community. If they had the opportunity to live in a different way, they probably would, right? So we have to figure out how to deal with that, and part of that is this housing thing. But part of it also is in how do you give people the ability to lift themselves up out of and it involves again voting on the side of the people, and which is another plank in our own overall theme of investing in the people. Because what you really need to do is to build a society where the wealth of the society is built on the backs of the productivity of the people. Not by the productivity, or not by sort of enhancing the ability of private commercial interests to make money. No. Yes, you will allow that, right? It's not the job of government to facilitate that. You give them the ability to do what they are able to do. But the focus on government should be on how to make the society as a whole productive and prosperous. And the way you do that is to ensure that the wealth is being driven by the productivity of the people. How do you do that? You have to invest in the people, especially the youth, right? So things like investing massively in technical education. Massively. And I'm not talking about, this one little skill acquisition program here or not. No. Technical schools. If you look at schools, Lagos State schools, and you ask what proportion of them are, traditional schools versus the ones that offer technical education, it's a very tiny amount that offer technical education. But if you think about our society and what the needs of our society are, and what people need to make them productive, you will see that a lot more, far more than presently exists, needs to be done in the technical education area. So that's going to be a massive focus for us. Then you have to also invest in the youth. Education should be free up to secondary school level. And when I say free, I mean truly free. Up to secondary school level for kids. And secondary school level includes JSS, then plus the SSS in the traditional school, or technical education in the technical line, right? And that way, you are ensuring that you are giving the youth the skill. And by the way, our population is mostly youth, as you know.
Yes.
The median age in Nigeria is maybe about 17 or 18, right? So that tells you. So that's one on the education. Healthcare, in our opinion, should be free for children, right, of school age. It should be free for children of school age. And these two things will reinforce one another. The education for children of school age, health for children of school age, free, and reinforce one another for children, particularly who are in school, right? Then if you add that to that, a school feeding program where they get at least 1 meal a day in the schools, right? You are basically creating this you are capacitating, giving them capacity, giving them the both the wherewithal, the health, and the ability and the skills to become productive in their own right. And the whole society will prosper for it, right? And what you'll find is that in 5, 10, 15 years, where you will be as a society is dramatically different from where you are today, right? And by the way, somebody will come up and say, how do you fund all of this? You'll be amazed at what you can fund if you remove the inefficiencies in government, and if you shift the focus of government from the pursuit of commercial interests to the investment in capacity of its people, and to drive the productivity of its people. And then the whole society benefits from it. Finally, I think that some of the things that make the bottom of the pyramid, that even create further hardship for people at the bottom of the pyramid, is not necessary. So you have to look at the taxes, fees, levies that are borne by those at the bottom of the pyramid, right? And to the extent that you can remove, reduce, eliminate those things, right, or reduce to the barest minimum, I think there's a lot of work that can be done in that area. And bear in mind that these levies, fees, and taxes that we're talking about, they are the formal ones, right, and they are the informal ones, right? So the ones that are collected by all sorts of unions and so-called kind of, quasi-unions, right? It's part of the tax burden and the burden of levies that is borne by the weakest in our society. And instead of, as a government, turning a blind eye to those things because they are removed from you, or they don't impact you directly, or your family, or what have you, realize that those things impact the productivity and the prosperity of society. And if you're trying to build an inclusive society, you must focus on those things as well.
All right, looking at infrastructural development in Lagos, what innovative solutions can address Lagos traffic congestion and then transportation challenges?
Well, you see, transportation is not really rocket science. In my view, there are just like 3 or 4 things that you have to do. The first thing is that, and it may sound like simplistic, but the first thing you have to do is that the existing infrastructure that is in place, you have to ensure that it is optimized, right? And how do you optimize it? By ensuring that, the roads that are already in place are in a good state of repair, that there is law and order in the use of the roads, and that law and order ensures that you don't have people creating constrictions that essentially diminish your capacity. If you have 100% capacity, but people are behaving anyhow and causing constriction, then maybe the effect you are getting from that capacity is only maybe 40 or 30%, right? So we can deal with that first. Secondly, is that, things like Lagos is a coastal city. So this rail that we've been battling with, for example, for decades, there's no reason why we should, right? There's just no reason why we should. What you need is to identify a few key axes and then ensure that we have rail lines on those axes. And then let's focus on doing them diligently in a very purposeful way. And in a few years, we'll get it done. Other countries and other cities have done it. So why it should be such a tremendous challenge for Lagos, I don't know. Look at the Blue Line, which is one of the things that the government will point to as one of its most, laudable projects, right? But how long did that thing take to deliver? And even today, if you go and look at what it's delivering, less than 5% of what they said it was going to deliver in terms of the passengers that is moving. So it's either there's something wrong with what they did, it's either they chose the wrong route to start, the wrong, do you see what I mean? If you think about the number of people that are commuting in Lagos, why is it that it's only about 5,000 people that thing is carrying, right? Whereas they predicted it to carry 150,000 per day.
Compared to the buses,
right? I mean, what that thing is carrying, actually, like less than 10 buses could probably carry it, right? So you have to ask yourself, what is going on there, right? So it's all about this idea of planning, strategically planning. And if you remember the conversation I had with you about mass housing, linking it to transportation strategy, if that is in place, these kinds of things you'll see less of these kind of things, right? Even the red line that we spoke about, it's been commissioned, maybe 2 or 3 times they've commissioned it. We have not seen the actual commercial operation start, right? So, again, a lot of these things is about how you prioritize and the extent to which you make what affects the life of the common man the highest priority of government. If you make that the highest priority of government, you will take decisions quickly, purposefully, and you commit resources that will make things happen quickly, right? So there's no rocket science in transportation. The last thing is water transport, which, I mean, it's probably never going to be like the way most people travel, but you can also have that. I mean, we see that Lagos State is trying to do something. We don't know the extent of the effect of it, but they have this omnibus thing which they talk about. But it's really not rocket science. It's just focusing on it, getting it done in a purposeful way, in an efficient way. And part of it is that these projects, if you look at the Blue Line, how much was spent to deliver the Blue Line? Over decades. So if you think about that, if money is not effectively spent, either because of corruption or because of inefficiency or because of man no man and giving things to contractors that are close to you and all of that stuff, the money of government will never be enough. It will never be enough. You think about a company that is run that way, right? It's like putting water in a basket. It will never be enough. But if you run a tight ship, right? If you run a tight ship financially, and you know that you have X, Y, and Z things that you're trying to deliver, and you're trying to deliver them in the most efficient and value added way possible, you ensure that you get the most efficient contractors. You set them to compete against one another, and then you monitor and ensure that they deliver on the job, right? And this is how it's done in places that work. And we should just not try and reinvent the wheel. We should just do what works.
All right. Looking at waste management in Lagos, what initiative can be implemented to promote sustainability and environmental stewardship?
So waste management, again, so first of all, this is a huge area in Lagos, right? This is not a trivial area. If you think about the population of Lagos and you think about the waste that is generated by that population on a daily basis, it is not a trivial thing. So what is clear is that to deal with it and to deal with it properly, you have to put your best foot forward. It's not something where, you will adopt a half and half approach to, right? Part of what we see in this area is that it's one of the ways in which government historically has dispensed patronage, right? Because you have these PSP operators and so on and so forth, and there's a way in which patronage comes to play in terms of like the award of those contracts and so on and so forth. So you can't divorce it from this whole notion of government acting properly, transparently in the public interest to ensure that those that have the capacity to do the work are the ones that are given the ability to do the work, and are the ones that are given the contracts to do the work, and that they do them. The other thing I would say is that a lot more could be done in terms of thinking about how do we make that waste into an asset, right? So there are a lot of places in the world where you see waste to power projects.
We have a place like that, or Jota dump site, that is, so loaded with waste, and the stench coming out affecting the environment.
Yes. So these are things that have to be managed, right? So you have things like waste to wealth projects or waste to power projects in jurisdictions across the globe, and this is something that we can do a lot more to explore locally, right? That waste can actually be a source of, wealth, right? And I think we can do a lot more in that area. But again, it's about it's about having a clear goal that is about the people, that is not seeking to line pockets, and is just looking for the solution that is most effective. I think this notion of waste to power is something that we would do a lot more of exploring, right? And the different ways in which we can use that waste, right, economically, while at the same time addressing the environmental challenges. Landfills are not, waste is not unique to Lagos State, right? It's not unique to Nigeria. Waste is generated everywhere. So it's a function of how you manage that waste, how you process the waste, how you recycle the waste. And part of that is also how you educate the people about the waste and the incentives that you build into it to affect people's behavior, right? So you have to educate them. You have to give them, if you're talking about recycling, you have to give them the capacity to recycle, make it easy for them to recycle, and maybe create the incentives that encourage them to recycle, including economics incentives if you have to do it that way, right? Because people respond to incentives. So let's just do it. Let's do it professionally. Let's not use it as a way of awarding patronage contracts or whatever. Let's just know that this is a very vital area. It is not a trivial challenge. We are over 20 to 30 million people generating waste every day. If you're not very focused on doing it and doing it well, you will be overwhelmed, and what you will see is the kind of landfills that you are talking about.
All right, sir. In rounding off this conversation, what will be your word for the people of Lagos?
I think that what I would just say to the people of Lagos is that I really want to salute them. I want to salute their resilience. I want to salute their I don't want to call it long suffering. It sounds like a biblical term, but that's what it feels like, right? And to say that, and to let them know that, it does not have to be that way. There's a way when you've been in something for so long, you come to the thought that, well, maybe that's how it should be, or maybe that's how it will always be, or, there's no. The reality is that people's standards of living in a well-managed, in a well-governed environment should be improving from year to year, not getting worse from year to year. So if something has been some way for 30 years, and at the end of 30 years, you can't say that this thing is substantially better than what it was at the beginning of that 30 years. For you personally, in your life and the life of the children that you see around you, and the lives that children lead and the lives that young people lead, then there is something fundamentally that needs to be fixed, right? And it's not a problem of resources. It's a problem of managing the resources. It's a problem of having the right people making the right decisions with the right attitudes and with the right objectives and with the right purposes. So I just want to encourage the people of Lagos that they must take an active interest now in ensuring that they hold the government accountable, that we all hold the government accountable, and ensure that those that are in those seats are acting in their interests. And that's part of what we have taken it upon ourselves to do by getting engaged in the political space. And so, again, I just salute the people of Lagos.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you very much for being part of this conversation this morning. We really appreciate your time and your expertise in attending to some of the questions. We hope we'll be able to bring you again some other time to talk about more issues as we look around Lagos and see how we can make things better.
Thank you very much.
That's a package this morning on the Newsmaker on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos, and we've been speaking with Mr. Funsho Doherty, who was the 2023 governorship candidate in Lagos, and we've been looking at shaping Lagos, reflection on governance and future prospects. Join us when we bring you another package of the Newsmaker on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. Till then, my name is Abiodun Adelore.